much for joining me in another video. So today we are looking at the style, the looks, and the handbags of the Olsen twins. So this is something I've started recently where I just look at people that have really strong defined personal style and we kind of just like break apart their looks, look at how they style their handbags and why it works, what we can learn. I really wanted to look at the Olsen twins. Like, how could I not do a series on like style and like handbags and not look at the Olsen twins? So we are gonna look at the Olsen twins. I honestly could have done like a whole series on their style in each decade, their looks in the 2000s, their looks in the 2010s, their looks now. But I just figured there's actually a lot of themes, and while there has been such an evolution in their style, it's almost like coming full circle. Like, there are things that they did in the 2000s that they're bringing back, and maybe this is just the way fashion is, right? If you're not familiar with the Olsen twins, if you've been living under a rock, for me as someone who is 31, who experienced their massive popularity, I remember watching like their movies. They were on the popular show Full House. They were very much, when I was a kid, like a commercialized product. Like, they had their own toys, their own clothing line, like their VHS series. They were very much at a very young age a commercial product. And you probably know they're really fashionable, but you might not know why. And I kind of just wanted to figure out, what is it that makes these women so chic? What is it about their personal style? When we look at them as like children, like they were always positioned and commercialized as like twins, like two people that like look the same, and they kind of were always like wearing matching outfits. But I think in the 2000s, when they started to become like young adults, they really wanted to make that distinction between each other. Yes, they are very connected and like have sort of this solidarity with each other, but they are their own individual people. They used fashion and style very early on to make this distinction of between who was who. So let's start off with the 2000s, when there was like this very popular aesthetic, and I very clearly remember it, and it was boho, but it was like also a little bit grungy, and they kind of did that. Mary-Kate especially really leaned into this aesthetic. Ashley, she wanted to define herself as a little bit more polished, a little bit more put together, whereas there was a little bit more grunge with Mary-Kate. But this was like an aesthetic that was not just popular with them, was popular with a lot of celebrities. And so the bag that I think that perfectly embodied this sort of era, I think, is the Balenciaga city bag, like that motorcycle style bag. It was slouchy, it had like the hardware bits, it had like the dangly zipper straps. Like, it was a very edgy, but like kind of had like a bit of that boho feel. It was a bigger bag, so they could kind of use it as a way to hide themselves away from the paparazzis. Along with that, another popular accessory was the Alexander McQueen skull scarf. Overall, their style in like the 2000s especially was very colorful, very much full of pattern, but they like to layer things. They would layer a lot. They would use lots of accessories, big chunky necklaces, big chunky jewelry, patterns on patterns. This was such a popular era for boho. And like, boho can be done in a variety of different ways. There is always like this eclectic nature about their style. Some days boho would be like mixed with gothic elements. Sometimes it would be like athleisure meets something like a little bit more like girly and pretty and frilly. A lot of mishmash, a lot of experimenting. I think really was that like turning point was when they kind of took on a little bit more of a gothic aesthetic, specifically wearing Alexander McQueen and those Balenciaga harness boots. Oh my gosh, I remember when I was like 18, like wanting these boots so badly. They're so expensive, I couldn't afford them. Mary-Kate like really leaned into it, whereas Ashley kind of took a little bit more of a romantic approach. This theme of more of a darker aesthetic is something that we would see more so in the 2010s. So let's talk about the 2010s. I think this was the decade where they solidified themselves as like iconic people in fashion. They really embraced that kind of dark aesthetic, but they transformed it and made it to something different. But one thing that they really started doing was, especially in the 2010s, was they started experimenting with silhouette and shape more than ever. Another important thing that they started doing was they really got into vintage and archival fashion, because they were seen wearing like vintage Chanel, Dior by John Galliano, Comme des Garçons from the 90s. Like, this wasn't just them following the trends, like they were really in love with fashion. They were in love with all the greats before them. Every red carpet event was an opportunity for them to show that they had this very broad fashion vocabulary that would span from Chanel to Yohji Yamamoto and everything in between. It also became a period of not just like really rare archival pieces, but just really very expensive exotics to like fur and croc. They liked the most luxurious materials. And I think the handbag that I think represents this approach, more so in like the early 2010s, it's got to be the bigger Birkin. That's the bag. The bigger, the better. Like the more massive. You know, obviously they're really petite girls. Like I'm really petite too. Like I'm basically like I'm the same size as the Olsen twins with a mom bod. I can't wear a Birkin 40. It would just look crazy on me, but they somehow did it. Like they were able to like wear these gigantic bags. The way they wore like lots of scarves and accessories in like mid 2000s, in the 2010s, they were still wearing lots of accessories, bigger sunglasses, bigger scarves, oversized everything. Lots of layers, lots of textures, lots of expensive materials, beautifully draped fabrics. One thing we did not see a lot of was a lot of color. Not a lot of color. Sometimes they would inject bits of color here and there. It was very strategic. If they used color, it was in a very strategic way. But lots of blacks and lots of neutrals, but lots of black. I was kind of thinking about someone else that has like a similar style approach, and this is a little bit off topic. There's this interior designer that I just love her style, and she's a maximalist, and her name is Abigail Ahern. And one thing she does is she doesn't necessarily use a lot of bright colors. If anything, her spaces are very neutral, or like colors that are like very muted. You kind of could tell maybe that's like a navy, or you could tell this is very, very dark green or very, very dark purple. It's more so about the shape and silhouette and the texture. And I think the Olsen twins take this same approach. It's not necessarily about bright, bold color. When I think of someone like Amal Clooney, if you're someone that is into colorful workwear, I think Amal Clooney is great for that, because it's very like polished and very proper, very classic silhouettes, but very bright and colorful. This is almost like the opposite. Well, I don't know if I want to use the word like maximalist to describe the Olsen twins. There's a lot of over accessorizing and a lot of expensive materials. While it was also about like the shape and the texture, it was also about movement. There was a lot of movement and how like light reflected off of certain fabrics. Just to really highlight this, I have this plain blazer by Saint Laurent. It's just a really like classic, like basic, very classic blazer. This is also black, right? Like look at the difference, like the way the light reflects on like the texture. This isn't real croc, by the way. And while I think their fashion brand, the Row, gets called the minimalist, I actually don't think their approach to fashion is very minimalist. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. People think of it because like they wear black, but just because you wear black doesn't necessarily make your style minimalist. Just the way I think like Amal Clooney's fashion isn't maximalist. For the Olsen twins, it was very much about experimenting with all the other elements of design, minus color. So now let's talk about the 2020s, and I really want to focus this section on their own fashion brand. And it's more so like the growth of their own fashion brand. This started when they were actually 16 in search of the perfect white t-shirt. I think there's something very relevant about this brand now, more so than any other period. This brand often gets called like minimalist, and I think by nature people call like the Olsen twins minimalist. I saw this quote from an ID magazine, and I think this pretty much sums up their brand in the best way possible, more so than I can explain. So this is it. In terms of the clothes, simplicity is implicit but not explicit. Basics are anything but. Couture-like in principle, but casual in ease. Slippers come in meshed cashmere and flip-flops in Tuscan leather. Bag handles are formed of not tied velvet or Napa scrunchies. It's luxurious in a deliciously puritanical American way, in the way that old Dutch masters are both sumptuously lavish yet incredibly somber. American in the way that Georgia O'Keeffe, even if she seems apart from it. Often the clothes are plain and enveloping, but what may appear minimal or even monastic actually feels wildly indulgent. The word luxury is used pretty much everywhere now, but for us it's something that makes your life easier, Mary Kate points out. The idea that you could buy something off the rack, put it on your body, and it already feels like it's a part of your wardrobe. That's luxury. You don't even have to think about it. This clothing is like insanely priced. Spending $400 on a plain t-shirt seems crazy to most people. That's the purpose of this brand. This is clothing that the Olsen twins would actually want to buy for like their more everyday lifestyles. The Olsen twins are their own clientele, especially being in these like circles of really wealthy people, like 100 millionaires kind of level, like people that like ride private jets like people on their yachts would wear. And I guess relative to other luxury brands, like $400 for a t-shirt's like pretty much the norm, but they would add a logo, and I think that's like the appeal to a lot of people, like it's something special, whereas like this is the wealthy person's like Uniqlo. You know, having something that may not have a logo speaks to, I think, their own personal like desire in fashion. For them, like having big flashy logos, for these women that have been their whole lives, since they were like 9 months old, have been in the public eye, they don't want anything flashy. Like they want something quiet, like they want something that is understated, and they want something that will just fit in their wardrobes. I think another reason why this brand, specifically around like the late 2010s to like now, the reason why I think this brand has even grown more in popularity is the absence of Phoebe Philo from the fashion industry. And you know, people always like make a lot of comparisons, how they're similar. A lot of people are like, oh, you know, I wish the Olsen twins took over Celine. But I do think Phoebe Philo Celine is a little bit different in that Phoebe Philo really centered this idea of luxury clothing for the everyday working woman, for the modern working woman. This concept of like the everyday working woman is different than like a celebrity being chaperoned from place to place. Phoebe Philo's collections look like they were like almost in places of like public transit. Like there was kind of this utility look about her fashion. I think the biggest distinction is the fact that the Row makes clothing for, I think, what really, really, really wealthy people want to wear casually. In terms of handbags, like I was gonna just pick a third handbag, and I was like, which bag by the Row would I pick? But I'm just gonna kind of group this all in one, their own line of handbags. So this is, I guess, my third pick, and I'm just gonna pick their own brand, because I just think every season they're just gonna like wear their own bag. Like they're not necessarily gonna wear Hermes bags. They're not necessarily gonna wear Balenciaga bags. Maybe they will, but I just always feel like whenever I see them, whether it's kind of like those smoke break paparazzi photos that like, you know, are kind of taken in like a weird corner and you see what they're wearing their own bags. They're wearing their own brand. And I think their own brand is really, I guess, like, yeah, I guess minimal. Like it's not crazy. There's no logos. Like there's keeping it as simple as possible because like they just don't want to be noticed. They're thinking about their own lifestyle in mind. Like people that have been constantly in the public eye like their whole lives, they don't want to be noticed. They want that discreet look, but they want it luxurious. Now, one bag I did think about highlighting was the Ascot bag. So maybe that bag, I know it was popular with like people like Rihanna, Zoe Kravitz, Chrissy Teigen, like a lot of like celebrities, but I'm just gonna, just for the purpose of this video, just say their whole line, because I think their whole line is kind of the direction their fashion is taking now. So in summary, like a couple lessons that we can take from the way they dress, the way they approach their personal style. They really love layering. Maybe it's because they live in New York. They use a lot of black or neutrals, but primarily black, but adding visual interest by using textures and accessories to make things more exciting. Another key thing that they are known for, and it's just the nature of their size, is how they've played with proportion to add something unexpected, as well as owning their own body, owning their own size. And this is something I've always personally, if you're petite like me, it's always a struggle to buy things like pants because you lose the integrity of the cut when you like have to get things like taken in. But like they kind of own it. Like they kind of own their petite size. Is a very confident thing to do, right? Like if you're petite like me, like a stylist is gonna say, wear tight-fitted clothing or slim-fitted clothing, wear things that are more high-waisted, wear like cropped things, wear platforms or like really high shoes to make you look taller. What they do consistently is they often dress, not always, but they often dress in sort of like the same color. Like they'll wear like black or they'll wear all neutral. So it's still aesthetically pleasing, but it doesn't compromise their comfort when they take an approach like that. And another key thing that I just personally love, their love of like archival fashion. And I think this is always going to add an element of something unexpected. It's about like carefully selecting the most perfect vintage piece. This isn't just you going to like the local thrift store and just kind of making a mishmash of things. That was kind of an approach maybe they had like early on when they were experimenting, but now they know exactly what they're looking for. The most perfect like vintage Chanel piece, the most perfect like Issey Miyake piece. Finally, like I think this is something that we may not necessarily 99% of us won't be able to do. We don't always have like a twin that we can twin with. Couples dressing, right? If you go somewhere, how are you gonna look with your partner? How are you gonna look with your bestie? How are you going to look with everyone else around you, right? Like just kind of this awareness of what your surroundings going to look like. Do you want to create like a certain vibe, like a cohesive, like matching vibe, or do you want to distinguish yourself or differentiate yourself between the other person, right? Like what they were doing in the early 2010s. I guess just my final thought. With the Olsen twins, they have like a really matured sense of style, but it's because they started thinking about fashion in a really critical or a really strategic way when they were really young. Their style has always been evolving. I think what's really important is to kind of have that experimental stage. Like for them, it was like boho grunge, right? Mixing like vintage with like things that are new, layering things, trying different patterns, trying different colors, to really find what is your true style. I don't think the Olsen twins' iconic red carpet looks would be as successful if they didn't have that 2000s era of pure experimentation. So yeah, that's my video, guys. Please let me know what you think in the comments. What did you guys think of this video? Is there anyone that you think I should cover? Like, I feel I just kind of had to cover the Olsen twins, but I kind of want to cover people that I think are a little bit different, not people that are talked about in the media as much, like Christine Lagarde or Emanuela Alt. Like, I'm looking for people like that. Please let me know what you think in the comments, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.